That's the global dystopia scenario where basically governments and central banks take over economy and financial markets. And it all starts from the idea that central banks take a bigger role in holding our deposits through the central bank digital currencies.
Please join us for our next live stream Sunday, January 10th at 9 p.m. Eastern. We'll go over current events, past guests, and of course, gold and silver news. Once again, our next live stream will be Sunday, January 10th, 9 p.m. Eastern. See you then. Hello again, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Silver Bullion Television, SBTV. I'm your host, Patrick Vieira. As always, if you are new to our channel or if you haven't already done so, please do subscribe, hit the bell to be notified on new updates, and give us a thumbs up if you like what we do. We truly do appreciate your support. Tuomas Malinen, Chief Economist of GNS Economics, joins us today. Tuomas is also an adjunct professor of economics at the University of Helsinki. His current research interests include economic growth, business cycles, economic crisis, monetary unions, and income inequality. We are delighted to have him here as a return guest. It's time to saddle up and silver up for Tuomas Malinen. Tuomas, good day and welcome back to SBTV. How are you doing?
Fine. Thank you. I'm doing very fine. It's nice to be here again.
How has the year-long pandemic affected Finland's economy and the psyche of Finland's people? I mean, what has Finland and perhaps to expand to Europe? How has that experience been in 2020?
Well, it has made people more scary in Finland and especially in Europe, but also more angry. So there's other people are afraid of the pandemic and all that everything brings, but a growing number of people are getting angry on the overreaching control of the government on our lives. So I don't know. We're not there yet, but if these lockdowns and moratoria continue, we might see there's a revolution brewing in Europe. Let's put it this way. So people are quite fed up. In many places, there are, for example, there have been riots in Paris and in Spain too, which have not been reported by the mainstream media for some strange reason. And so there is stuff brewing under the surface. So and Finland is, well, we Finns usually take things very, very calmly. So it has not, it has not caused anything major here yet, but also here the frustration of the people towards the government and the control of the European Union is growing. So, like I said, there's a revolution brewing in Europe. Let's see how it plays out.
Earlier this year, you wrote an article titled "The Stages of Collapse," and this article looked at how the pandemic has thrust the world onto a path leading to an economic collapse of epic proportions. Can you give us an update on that article? Meaning, what stage are we at in this collapse, and has it played out as you expected?
Yeah, well, actually, we wrote that article in December last year, so before the pandemic hit. So it was a general view on how when things start to unravel in the global economy, it tried to describe how it's going to go. So and it has done a quite good job. And then the pandemic hit. It just kind of it was the pandemic was kind of the thing that pushed the world economy over the edge, and we had 5 stages in it. First was the onset, which basically describe any trigger that pushes the world economy into a crisis, and then there was the counterattack was the next. And we are actually in the counterattack, and then there was the flood, the calamity, and the recovery. And actually now that we just updated it a week ago, and we see that we are in interim stage between the counterattack and the flood. So the counterattack was we envisaged it to be a global counterattack of the authorities against the crisis. So it would include monetary stimulus, fiscal stimulus, and all the stuff that has now basically happened. The flood states describe the failure or the flood of failures of the zombified corporations across the globe. And that was kind of thing that was stopped. It started in the summer, but it was stopped using for example, the debt moratoria, which basically made it impossible for the creditors to have or push the debtors in the bankruptcy to get their money back. And of course there was this massive fiscal stimulus, massive monetary stimulus, and so the counter attack has been pushed a bit further than we originally thought, but it effectively stopped the flood states, which we are now considering that when the moratoria end, it will become a tsunami stage. Oh. But because when the moratoria are gone, then there just massive flood of corporate bankruptcies probably. But we are in the interim stage between the counterattack and the flood now.
Okay, tsunami, since we're on that word, Japanese word, I want to talk about Japanification, which you wrote in another recent article on your website, GNS Economics. Obviously, it's possible for one country to have their central bank intervene in their equities markets, as Japan has done. And overall, the outcome has been stagflation in the Japanese economy. But in your view, can Japanification be sort of upsized as a model for global governments and markets?
No, that actually cannot happen. There's 4 reasons for that. First is that when the Japan started its path on the Japanification was after the financial crisis of the 1990s. And if you look at the global economy, it was growing rather rapidly through the next 2 decades, which supported the Japanese economy by supporting its export sector. So that was the one thing that why Japan could pull that off. But actually, if you look at it globally, then you notice that if we have a zombified corporate and banking sectors, they really cannot support the economy. If corporations are in this constant need of further debt resuscitation or debt in easy terms, they cannot really grow. The same with the banks. If they're zombified, they will just support the weak companies. And the financial markets actually need a strong cooperative and banking sector so that it supports the financial markets with profits, capital, and liquidity. So you need all these things for the economy to work properly. And while one country can do it, while the stronger nations with stronger corporations, stronger banks support the global economy, and that one country or one or two or few countries, you cannot do it on a global scale because there would be no one to support it. And we have thus far failed to establish any outer space business relations. So we don't have any business relation with Mars or something like that. So we cannot have support outside our globe. So that's why the Japanification cannot work. So and that leaves us only with 2 options. We can or let the system kind of crash and be born again, or go into this central bank run global dystopia where everything basically is in the economy is controlled by the central banks.
Yeah, we'll touch on that in just a bit. But we're seeing a sort of Japanification going on in the West with Western central banks keeping companies alive, as you mentioned, zombie companies. And when the markets are actually saying otherwise, the markets are saying some companies have run their course while others are companies that we want. Are we in danger where governments and central banks, rather than the people and the markets, are perhaps centralizing our choices and steering us towards what they want rather than what we want?
We're actually just there. And that's the global dystopia scenario which we described, where basically governments and central banks take over economy and financial markets because they cannot stand alone. So corporations are too weak, financial markets are, overvalued, and they need to they need to be constantly supported. And that's the dystopia. The governments and central banks really take over our economy, start to so if you look at what is one way to do it, is the central bank digital currencies. So if you have a central bank digital currency, it just basically means that you have an account in a central bank, which may seem, fine. But immediately when you create a central bank digital currency, central bank becomes a competitor for all the commercial banks. And then it plays a role of, it's in a competitor, it's in competition with them. It also regulates them, and it should be the provider of liquidity of last resort to the same banks. So it corrupts the system immediately. And then if you think when you go into there is a banking crisis, central bank answers say, well, we may save the stockholders and bondholders, but let's move all your accounts to the central bank and let the banks fail. And that is how you actually may create a point where vast majority of all deposits of corporations and households are in the hands or are in the central bank. And as central banks are, they're just quasi independent in a sense that they are run by governments, although they may get their capital from the private sector. Then you have a really interesting scenario where, you have a kind of totalitarianistic system where the government can issue all kinds of, enforcing measures upon you through the central bank and through the accounts. They may, for example, say that, well, now we are paying interest of minus 10%. Or they may say that you have criticized the government too much, so now you will not be allowed to access your funds in the central bank. So this creates all kind of dystopian, really scary scenarios. And it all starts from the idea that central banks take a bigger role in holding our deposits through the central bank digital currencies. So this is the very disturbing dystopian scenario, which is rather close now, as all central banks basically are planning to issue their own digital currencies.
Yeah, that we're hearing that quite a bit about the central bank digital currencies coming in. But are central banks, in your opinion, are they overreaching with their influence and interference, or are they helping, as they like to say?
No, they are not helping at one bit. If you think where the actual idea of central banking began, it was in the when there was first medieval banking crisis in the 14th century in the Italian city-states. Was it Genova? Yeah, probably. And two massive banks fail, or big banks fail. Then a discussion started that there would need to be a liquidity backstop for the commercial banks, so that the commercial banks could get their funding in a crisis from some outside institution. And this is the original idea of central banks. It should be a liquidity backstopper of commercial banks. And when the Fed was created, and then there was of course the period when the Swedish central bank, the Riksbanken, and the Bank of England were created, and they were then they took the role of minting the coins and sometimes lending to the government and stuff like that. But when the Fed was created in 1914, the whole thing started to corrupt when the Fed started to experiment on how it can affect the interest rates in the economy. And that is when the kind of a ever increasing role of central banks got started. And now they have stepped beyond any of their mandates. If you think about what happened in the spring in the US, so the Fed started to lend to corporations, to municipalities, to the government, to all sectors. It basically took over the repo markets, and it was just insane. The Fed became the financial markets of the US in just few months. And it actually, I think it was it the balance sheet of the Fed ballooned by $3,000 billion in just 3 months. It was an insane increase in the balance sheet, and that was the idea of central banking never was to have such a big grasp on the economy, because economy should work between households and corporations. That's how the economy should work. With the risk and reward relationship, and the is reflected on the prices in the capital markets. And now you have central banks there, which don't care about the risk and reward. They just want to manipulate the interest rates. So we have moved so far beyond anything we thought as an open economy in just 10, 20 years ago, that it's quite unfathomable, actually, if you think about it. So no, the central banks they are not helping. They are destroying our economies. They're just, I don't know, they're just afraid if they let go, everything collapses. But that's basically what we need now. We need the system to be purged from the bad debt and bad investments.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and I think one example was an article that you folks had posted from GNS Economics, your Q review December 2020, titled the aftermath, and I want to read one paragraph from it. The fragile global economy, and what you had written here is, it's not yet widely appreciated how vulnerable the global economy has become. In late 2017, we reported, as probably the first macroanalytic firm in the world to do so, that the growth of the total factor productivity, or TFP, has stagnated globally since 2011. And this was both unprecedented and unexpected, because productivity has generally been assumed to grow in economic expansions. And we're just coming off the longest economic expansion in history. QE1, QE2, QE3, we're at QE4, 5, whatever it is. And yet we are not seeing productivity grow. So I want to ask you, with all this money being thrown in to support all of these companies and whatnot, why are we not seeing productivity grow?
Well, I have to say that I'm a trained growth economist. So I've been doing the research on economic growth for 17 years before moving full time to our firm. So growth and productivity issues are very, very familiar to me. And it's the thing is that, basically the money thrown to the economy by the central banks and the government is what corrupts the system. This was already seen in the Japanese example. When you have very low interest rates, you have plenty of debt available, it will create a situation where the risks of investment do not reflect the actual rewards anymore, in a sense. And there's a thing called creative destruction. It's a process where we see that the less productive older firms exit the market, and new, more productive firms with new technology take their place in the markets. And what happens if the interest rates are really lower and negative is that the old firms can linger on by issuing debt after debt, or having banks support them, and it corrupts the kind of the very foundation of how economy should work. And this is the process through which it seems the kind of the stagnative force is unleashed on the productivity side. Because if you think productivity is in a simple terms, it's the part of economic growth that cannot be explained by the additions to the capital or labor in any given production. So it's kind of an unexplained part, which is usually thought to consist of the technological innovations. And when the productivity is not growing, It means that the technological innovations are not flowing into the economy as they should. And when you add at the same time you have the debt levels are growing, then this is a kind of a very, very troublesome problem, because the productivity is what basically uh, states how much the firms uh, can create revenue in their businesses. And if the productivity as a national level stalls, it means that the revenue stream is not, it's not high enough. So and while the debt is growing, so you have income, basically you have income stalling while the debt levels is growing at the national level. And this is of course completely unsustainable. This system will crash at some point because of this. And that's why this is a the productivity is a I could have explained this better. Productivity is a bit it's a bit academic and quite technical concept. But and you can find a lot of free stuff actually from our website where we open up the productivity issue. We have a one blog coming probably early next year, early January, explaining the total factor productivity in more detail. But the simplest example is that you think as the productivity as your income stream, and if it's not growing, then it's not good.
Okay. Um, Federal Reserve head Jerome Powell, he recently said something along the lines of, "We're not going back to the old economy." A question for you: why do you think he said that, and what type of a new 2021 or post-pandemic economy are we headed to?
That's a truly scary statement from the biggest central bank of the world. If it were, it's just, I think what he says is that they have resuscitated the global economy to a point where it cannot sustain itself by itself. So if the central banks take out their support, the system collapses. And that's truly a horrifying picture. But if you consider, for example, the bond markets, sovereign bond markets in Europe, and let's say that the ECB will, stop their bond buying and start to, selling their sovereign bonds. Well, the yields of Italian and Spanish bonds would explode. There would be a default, and same with probably many corporations. So I think what Jerome Powell is saying, or the Chair Powell is saying, is that it has become it has become impossible from them to leave or to let the economy to function by itself. And that's really and that's a thing, a thought we all should ponder really carefully, because it means that in the future the role of central banks need only to grow, because they cannot be, if you want the economy to grow and it cannot grow by itself, then the role of central banks need to grow all the time. And then we truly get into the global economic dystopia, where the central banks effectively rule our economy, and we are scarily close of that point. So it's a disturbing statement for sure, and yeah, I think he just means that the central banks are trapped.
Okay. We often hear analysts, pundits talk about the real economy. What would the real economy be or look like without the Fed intervening?
Well, at first it would look like collapsed one. So I think there are like so many. It's estimated that both in Europe and in the US, close to 20% or even over of the corporations are zombies, or big corporations are zombie corporations, which cannot sustain their operations without the continuous flow of debt. Basically, how do you measure how do you how do you measure a zombie corporation is that it cannot pay its interest expenses from its income stream. So that's the uh, simple description of a zombie company. So the real economy probably cannot sustain itself without the central banks. So it would collapse. But after that, whole the system would have been cleared out. We would have, new technologies to invest, and corporations could, issue debt at reasonable interest rates, and it would start to grow again. And the productivity would surely start to grow again. We just need to go through a kind of a collapse now to get into that point where the real economy, grows organically again.
This new economy, 2021 economy, post-pandemic economy, whatever people want to call it. What do you think has pushed this new economy upon us more? Is it the pandemic itself that brought this on, or is it really more the central banks and governments with their influence and interference that has brought it upon us?
Central banks and governments. The thing is that, you know, our history, the world history is full of this kind of shocks. Okay, this was the first global pandemic in 100 years, but still, they are there. And it's the resilience of the economy is how it measures how can it take these shocks, take these punches, kind of. And our economy was so weak, economy was so fragile already when the pandemic struck. So it would have collapsed without, central banks and governments stopping it. But while they're stopping it, they're just making the problem worse all the time. So yeah, so pandemic was just something that hit us. It happened. It occasionally happens, and but the real carnage, which is coming, is the economic carnage which is coming. It's because of the central banks and governments or what they have been doing for since 2008.
Thomas, both the US dollar and the euro, the two most widely used currencies throughout the world, they're being debased right now with all this money printing going on, digit distribution going on. Have one or both, or maybe even all fiat currencies crossed that failed safe zone to the point of no return? They're on sort of like a one-way suicide mission.
Well, interesting way to put it, but yeah, they actually may have, passed that threshold again. Oh, well, yeah, again, well, because fiat currencies are often then to have the kind of a characteristic that they are pushed to the point where they fail. So yeah, and those considering euro should be really careful what comes to the political risks in the eurozone. Let's say that for some reason the recovery fund of the European Union is not ratified in all 27 member states, so it fails. How long will Italy stay in the euro then? No one knows. But if Italy leaves, Spain could leave, Portugal could leave, the whole euro could unravel. So if you own euros, you might want to, check or keep your eye on what's going on in Europe, because it's not impossible and that the whole euro is not there after, let's say, 5 years. So and currencies have come and gone in the history of the world. So that's not a big issue. But I think many investors are not paying enough attention to the fact that the eurozone can unravel in multitude of political reasons. So and it can really happen. So you have to understand that we are not a federal union. A country can leave and it can unravel the whole system, and it's a political decision if that happens. So and political fragmentation in Europe is running really high at the moment. So that's a risk every FX investor should keep their eye on.
Yeah, I mean that's a great point because let's say if confidence is lost in both the US dollar and in the euro, where do we go? I mean, what will people confidently see as money?
Well, if you talk to the IMF, they will probably say that then we go to the central bank, a basket of central bank digital currencies, probably. But I think we got the gold and silver and probably some private cryptocurrencies in that stage. I think we could see even the some kind of era of wildcat banking or wildcat currencies. If you, for those who don't know what that means, wildcat banking was an era in the U.S. history where all the banks basically issued their own currencies. So it was a rather interesting period, which I recommend everyone checks. For example, from a Professor Gordon's excellent book, Misunderstanding Financial Crisis. But we might see at least a period where we would have different, competing currencies. Some would be backed with gold, some with silver, some with some, cryptocurrency. Yeah, we can actually see in that kind of a phase coming upon us. It all depends on what happens to the central banks, and we are rather skeptical that they can, keep this role.
Okay, yeah, it's interesting how you said banks would create their own money, sort of independent from each other. And we're often hearing the new money that's going to come into play. People like Christine Lagarde is planting the seeds in Europeans' minds about central bank digital currencies. What are you hearing about central bank digital currencies or CBDCs in Europe?
Well, actually, just the latest news was that they had a kind of a public hearing on the ECB issue digital currencies, but it was concentrated on the technical issues. There was not a single question about whether it should be done or not. So they are pushing it hard now. They are kind of creating a vision that we need this, and that's so it's they are trying to push it through. I think they will make a decision by summer or something like that when they will have it done. And so it's a all of us who kind of um, cherish our economic freedoms. The time is running short to defend it, because we need to. I think we need to create at least sound banks and maybe even more cryptocurrencies to kind of push back the idea of central bank controlled digital currencies and thus the economy. So we are kind of into that battle already, and I think it's a interesting times, because in previous times only currencies backed with gold would be a good hedge against the central banks. But now we could have a kind of a symbiosis of gold and silver backed currencies and cryptocurrencies. So it's an interesting thing. But Europe is definitely moving towards issuing a central bank digital currency, and that's something we need to push back.
Yeah, it's another great point because, since perhaps the biggest quality of money is confidence, how will central banks or the European Central Bank get people to have confidence in their CBDC?
Well, I think that for Europe is the banking crisis has been postponed maybe two times in Europe, but it's coming. So, for example, the European Central Bank is truly worried what is happening under the debt moratoria in Italy and Spain. So there will be a banking crisis, and I think the playbook or the game book for the ECB is that issue the central bank backed digital currency and try to have everyone take it when the banking crisis comes. I don't know is it how they see it, but if they are, then it's a really sinister plan. But when the banking crisis hits, then you have the one entity that can provide endless liquidity or money, and that's the central bank. However, the problem with the European Central Bank is that if some countries leave the eurozone and default, on the debt, their sovereign debt the ECB is holding, then it creates a perplexing problem for the ECB, as it would eat away their capital. And like, for example, the Fed has the backing of the Treasury. Bank of England has the backing of the Treasury. The ECB has backing of no one. So in any case, it's the ECB is not so powerful as it has been depicted to be. It's not. In that decision, when the capital of the ECB is, or the losses are massive, then it's up to Germany will decide whether it will recapitalize the ECB or not. So regardless what the ECB tries to do with the digital currencies, it's a very vulnerable bank actually. So it's not a strong central bank in a sense, and this is something everyone should also remember.
Okay, so should perhaps countries in the Eurozone consider to go back to their own sovereign currencies fairly soon?
If you ask me, they could start tomorrow or today. It's not, the Eurozone has already failed. It will, keeping it together will cost massively, like thousands of billions of euros, and it's not worth it. So we just let the euro go.
Okay, the uncertainty of governments and central banks' policies, the destruction of the most widely used currencies, the plans for new money and new economies. What might investors want to consider as a safe haven to store their wealth, as both the turmoil and opportunities will be quickly coming upon us?
Well, we have been saying for over a year that you go with gold, silver, and possibly some cryptos. We are not trusting the cryptos yet because we don't really know how they behave in a crisis. Will there be enough liquidity, and and there's the risk of governments, banning them, which would hurt the ability to use them as payments. So, yeah, gold and silver, and I would recommend that the investors would look banks which are backed by gold. There are not very many of those around, but that would kind of make it possible when the crisis comes, and all the asset classes or the prices basically crash, to get leverage debt which would be backed by gold, and to really take a advantage on the far sell prices across the globe. So that would be I think something investors might want to consider, that you need to have the liquidity.
Yeah.
When the crisis truly hits, it may come by summer or by fall next year, then you will need to have liquidity in a safe position, so you can take advantage of the highly depressed prices.
Should gold perhaps be more than ever be looked at as an insurance, perhaps more than an investment at this point, or are they still pretty equal, investment slash insurance?
I would say that investment, insurance, and a store of liquidity.
Mm.
So if you think about, if the crisis really breaks during, like for example, during the when the pandemic really hit, there was all the stores that sell gold coins and scrap gold and stuff like that were basically they sold they were sold empty, because Finns run to the stores to buy gold. So it's very likely that when the crisis truly gets going, the price of gold will go through the roof, and that will be the only sure store of liquidity during the crisis. So it's both investment, it's a safe haven asset, and a store of liquidity.
Okay.
Basically.
And you touched on this a bit, so I just want to recap one more time. The looming or perhaps still ongoing banking crisis, on how global dystopia awaits, as you spoke on. What options really do the world's central banks and governments have going forward?
Monetize everything. that's the only option left, and that's then we have the global Gosbankification. Gosbank was the central bank and the only bank of the former Soviet Union, which basically gave loans and funding to all the projects. So in that, the only option they have is to issue the digital currencies, take over the economy and the financial markets by going in every market and monetizing all the debt and stuff like that. And all the central bank analysts I have been discussing or talking about this, they have basically said that central banks will not go there. But I don't know. We will see. We're not really giving any odds of how they will behave. But there are only extreme options left going forward. That's something that every investor should now fully acknowledge.
All right, we'll heed those words. Tuomas, before we wrap up, can you let us know more about your work with GNS Economics and if you're working on anything new?
Yeah, actually, we're working on something new, but we cannot talk about it yet. But yeah, we have actually, 2 days. This will probably be over, but we had a year-end offer actually. But I urge everyone to check our Depricon services, which is a monthly outlook, and then also the Q review, which is a quarterly analysis on the world economy. So just go and check those on our website, gnseconomics.com.
Yeah, the Q review, some pretty fascinating work. I was reading through it earlier. But Tuomas Malinen, we appreciate the time you've given us, and hope we can do this again soon.
Thank you. It was nice to be here, and surely let's see how the crisis continues.
That was Tuomas Malinen, CEO of GNS Economics, sharing with us about the coming global economic crisis. To learn more, please visit gnseconomics.com. If you like this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to the SBTV channel to be updated on new content. And do also check out the SBTV podcast on iTunes and Spotify.